It's been almost 2 decades since we started our journey to educate and help you take action so you may better manage your financial future. Our goal is to help you accomplish your life's purpose. This podcast reveals financial tips, strategies, and insights that will help you to set your financial goals and guide you along the way. This is Managing Your Financial Future, brought to you by the advisors at Lucia Capital Group.
And we welcome you back, Managing Your Financial Future. Thank you so much for joining us here on Spotify. I'm Johnny Dean, your non-advisor host, podcast host, interviewer, longtime radio TV kind of guy. Professor Plum, a longtime planner type. How long you been a CFP?
Since the late 80s, I think.
Long time.
I can't remember the date that I got it.
Yeah.
Might have been 1990.
Okay. All right. I was trying to think. Again, I've talked about this before. This program, in its various forms, is over 30 years old.
Yes.
We've been doing this since 1991. And it was a local nighttime show for 1 hour, remember?
Against 60 Minutes.
That's right, it was. And then it was it was on the weekends for one, back on the early radio.
And then we took the off baseball season, 10 o'clock at night show, Monday through Friday for a while.
That's right. And sometimes we were partially interrupted or preempted by baseball. And I mean, my gosh, that was a long time ago. And then we switched to another radio station. We took the morning show. Remember, we were Morning Drive.
Yeah, and I'm not a morning person per se.
I don't know. We were Morning Drive for 3 or 4 years. And I mean, try talking about annuities at 6:06 in the morning.
Taxes. Rise and shine. It's tax time.
It didn't occur to me then, but who gets up at the first thing in the morning and wants to hear about, irrevocable life insurance trusts or something,
And then we went to noon. 9 to noon on the West Coast.
Yeah, it was 9 to noon on the. That's when we got nationally syndicated, and that was in 2000. That I remember. Year 2000. We've been doing the show for a long time, and then we got nationally syndicated in 2000. And that's been when people still listen to the radio. There's no such thing as a podcast. We were years away from that. Back in those days, we were all on AM. We were on, at one time, we were on 80-something stations.
That was awesome.
And all but 2 were AM radio. Ask anybody what AM radio is anymore.
Well, I remember we get calls from areas that I'd never even heard of, and I'd have to go, look up where the call was coming from.
Remember Murfreesboro, Tennessee?
I don't remember it. I remember the name.
Yes, that we had a call from them, and they had said the one thing they asked us, they didn't have a money question. They said, "Can you please talk more slowly?" They really said that. He said the caller said, "We don't speak this quickly here," and it showed us the kind of the power of radio and the power of media to affect people's lives. And we would get questions. The other thing that we had. And we'll get into the topic here in a bit. We're getting into these. We have a home topic. We're going to talk about selling your home, and this will lead into that. But remember, we also did an afternoon show starting in 2001. I think it was 2000, maybe right at the .com.
No, we did the afternoon in the Bay Area in the 90s.
Well, it started in the late 90s. It was 99,
98.
No, it wasn't that early because I wasn't full time. With the company back then.
You're still in college?
No. Oh, gosh, no. I was in my 30-somethings. No. I wasn't. I know when I came over here to work full-time in this office that it was 99. Anyway, at the time, it was the .com boom, and we had an afternoon show a separate afternoon show in the Bay Area of California, strictly for San Jose, San Francisco listeners.
Well, and I remember getting calls on real estate in the Bay Area at that time, and it was... I'm looking at buying this fixer-upper right next to a freeway. It's got bars on the windows, and it was like 800 square feet, and it was $1 million.
Right.
And this was in 1999, 2000.
Yeah, it was incredible. I've got Professor. I've got $4 million of stock options.
Yes.
I just turned 21, so I can go celebrate. What do I do with these? Do I let it ride?
How do I do this without paying a whole lot in taxes?
Yeah, exactly. Boy, those were the days. So doing things like that, talking to people like, for example, in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, or versus people in San Jose, California at that time, all the tech, all the Silicon Valley and all that stuff really gives you an idea of what's going on in people's minds. And it gives you an idea of what kind of help people need, advice people needed from a financial standpoint.
And it was different. across from different areas.
That's what I'm saying. It was different, as different as you could get from even like New Orleans. We were big in New Orleans.
Oh, it was fun.
In Metairie, Louisiana, they had different questions than somebody who was calling from Seattle or somebody who was calling from Silicon Valley or somebody in Boston.
Or Philadelphia.
It really was interesting. We got a lot of annuity calls from the Phoenix area. And
Yes.
we would get
Florida.
And Florida. We got stock option calls from San Francisco. Anyway, so this gave us some idea of what to talk about. Now, when we get into the topic here of home sales, this is why I brought that up about different areas of the country, because all over the country, home prices over the last 10 years have gone up. I was looking at the Case-Shiller Index, I think they call it. You could look it up. From 2012 to the end of 2021. Or I think they had it through October of 2021. I don't think the last quarter is in yet. But anyway, close enough to 10 years. Home values across the country, according to the Case-Shiller study, were up just about 104%.
Well, my house is up a little more than that from 2012. Problem was, I didn't buy it in 2012.
No, you bought it a high. You saw a nice big dip, and then it finally came back.
I bought it in late 2005.
At the height.
Just before the top of it. And I think it dropped about 40% between 2006 and 2012, and then it's come back about 115, 120%.
Well, we all kind of lost value in our homes. You lost a lot more because of when you bought it.
That wasn't fun.
But the fact that across the country, home prices have risen so much in certain areas, our area, now we're in the Southern California area. In our area, it's gone up maybe more than that.
Well, it's gone up a little more than 100%, but the dollar numbers are fairly large because they were large to begin with, compared to some other places where it's still up 100%. That $200,000 house is now $400,000 plus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The difference was the average house where we were was
$600,000 is now $1.2 million
plus.
Plus, and my house is no bigger than it was 24 years ago when I bought it.
There's just more people that want it.
It really, it's unbelievable. And this kind of thing, this phenomenon, it really, no matter where in the country you are, but this kind of phenomenon, especially in areas where home prices have gone up and the dollar value is so high, has gotten people interested in selling their home. And
a lot of people want to move for various reasons. And part of it is they're looking at the equity. They're looking at how much growth they've had at their property. And maybe they want to move to a different area, maybe a lower tax state or a different state.
Yeah.
We see that quite a bit. And they're saying, how can we move? And maybe, they're moving from the Silicon Valley out to another area where it's becoming a booming area as well, just not quite as crazy house price. If you want to know crazy house pricing, just look up what the house prices are like in San Jose, in any of those areas by the Silicon Valley.
Palo Alto, the whole
area. If you're not from around there and haven't seen those prices, you will be shocked.
Well, as shocked as we were to hear about, now back then, $800,000, $900,000, $1 million homes for 1,000 square feet in
next to a freeway in a high crime area,
right, or whatever it was. I mean, that was a lot of money. That never really changed. It may have dipped a little bit, but if you go back and look at them, some of those are $2 million
or more.
So while we're talking about numbers like this, the fact that it did go up nationally, just across the board, according to Case-Shiller, says that people have a lot of equity in their homes. And they are doing things like considering moving to another state, lower tax state.
And it used to be, as we got older and we got to retirement, we would downsize, where we would sell the big house where we raised all the kids and move to a smaller house because we don't need the space. We don't need as much room. Mm-hmm. But from what I've been noticing with people getting into retirement, they're not downsizing. They're upsizing.
Because they don't have to. Here's what I've seen. And this is, again, from the Southern California perspective, which obviously the dollar values are higher. But what they're doing is taking their home that they bought 20 years ago or whatever for, $300,000. They're selling it for $1.3 million. And they're taking that money and putting this into a home that's even bigger than the one that they had in California, but still is cheaper.
In a different area.
in a different area. Well, they moved to a Midwest somewhere, or they've moved. That's what I'm saying. They're moving to another area, another state, where the home prices are comparatively cheaper, but they're getting more house for a cheaper amount. And by the way, when was the first house you ever bought?
My wife and I didn't buy a house until the mid-90s.
You were renting because so you guys were renting.
We were renting up until we were dirt poor
till the mid-90s.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, all right.
We got married and then my son was born on our first anniversary. So we didn't have that period of time where you got married and you both worked and you built up the nest egg. And no, we had kids right away, and that makes the money go the other way.
So your son is born on your wedding anniversary.
On our first wedding anniversary.
It was in June, I think.
Actually, he was born a half hour after our first wedding anniversary. We spent the entire first wedding anniversary in the hospital in labor.
Oh, but it was actually after midnight.
He was born at like 12:27 in the morning.
Because I know you guys have like your whole family's like, and most of the latter half of, I think it's June.
Yes.
Has
and in fact, when one of my son-in-laws asked permission to marry my daughter, I said, almost everything about you is perfect except for your birthday is 2 days after mine. I just can't have any more birthdays in June. I mean, we it's already our financial hell week.
That is true. Oh, it's you're going to have to figure that one out.
I did give him permission. He ended up
of course.
He's a wonderful father to my grandson, wonderful husband to my daughter.
Well, and so I mean, I bought my first place in 1988. Which was a condo. And I've kind of been able to ride the equity. You know, you sell it. We sold it for more in 1990, and then in 1998, and we kind of built the equity up from there. But we've talked about this. I don't know that we'll do this, but we've talked about this as we approach retirement. Sometime, I would guess, in the next 7-8 years, about selling the home, moving someplace where maybe the taxes are less, or just, home prices and the cost of living is less than where we are. And I've heard this from many people who have wanted to do the same thing, but they're concerned that they're going to have to pay
a bunch of taxes.
Because here's the deal. If I have a stock that I've been holding for many, many years, I bought for $10 a share and it's now worth $100, just making this up. I got a $90 gain and I got, I'm going to sell 500 shares. There's a lot of capital gains taxes.
It can be.
And what I want to bring up for this particular podcast is I'm doing this because we've had questions about this. I've had this personally. Nobody that, is connected to the firm, but I've had this from people who did not understand how the sale of a home works and how it has worked since really the late 1990s.
Yes, since May 7th of 1997, to be exact.
That's when it started as part of the taxpayer, they called it the Taxpayer Relief Act, which I'd forgotten about. I looked this up.
And for a lot of people, the old rule may actually work better because of how much the pricing has gone up.
Yeah.
But that old rule doesn't exist anymore. The old idea that you had 2 years to buy another house, and as long as it was of equal or greater value, you didn't realize any gain.
Yeah, let's take this again, because this is, I think, where people's heads still are. The old rules prior to 1997, if you had gain in your home.
Right. And there was a one-time age 55 or older, but we'll skip that for the moment. This is just in general. If you had a house and you sold your house at a gain, you had 2 years to buy another house of equal or greater value. And as long as you bought it equal or greater within that 2 year period of time, you did not realize the gain. So back in the day, you may have bought a house for $100,000 and you sold it for $175,000, and you bought another house within that 2 year period of time from the date you sold the first one for $200,000.
Mm-hmm.
You moved up.
You rolled that gain into the new house.
That $75,000 of gain wasn't taxable, but your basis on the new house was now $125,000. So when you ultimately sold that gain would still be there.
Yeah.
No,
you were building. In other words, you were over the years, depending on how many times you moved and how home prices went. I mean, you could have quite a big tax basis,
right? Or very little tax basis because you've been rolling gain into it all the way through, and you weren't adding to it. But in 1997, they changed the rule, thanks to some campaign promises that the two sides one-upped each other.
That was a great campaign year. It really was.
96 campaign year.
You had Bob Dole on one side and Bill Clinton. The two of them were pretty much on the same page, quite frankly, for at least from a tax standpoint. But yes, go ahead. So this changed because of that campaign of 96.
So after May 7th of 1997, if you sold your home, there was no requirement that you bought another home. And in fact, buying another property, equal or greater, lesser value, it didn't matter. It has no impact on the taxability of the sale of the first home that you had there, the one that triggered all this. All that mattered was how long have you lived in that house that you just sold, and how much gain do you have? For an owner, a single owner, if your gain was $250,000 or less, and you'd lived in it for at least 2 years of the previous 5, you didn't have to report any taxable event. And I remember thinking, wow, 250, that's a lot of gain, back in the 1997 days. Now it's about a week and a half.
It's nothing.
And for a married couple, because there's 2 owners, presumably, you've got 250 per owner.
You can combine them, so you have
500,000 of gain, potentially tax-free. You do not have to buy another property. You don't have to do anything. You just have to sell the property at a gain and have lived in it for at least 2 years as your primary residence. Meaning, if anybody asked where you live, that's where you lived. You were registered to vote there. You filed your property taxes based on that address and things of that nature. So where you live, your primary address, is what is an issue. And you had to live in it and they actually went by the number of days. I don't have the number of days memorized, but 24 of the past 60 months, 2 of the last 5 years.
Yeah.
However many days that works out to be.
I couldn't tell you, but whatever.
So, and they look at, how do they know? Well, I don't know how they know. It's Big Brother. But they do know if you're filing your tax return at some other address and then you try to claim this address as your primary residence, they may question it. And if they're looking at your return for any other reason and you've ticked them off, they'll look at every reason. Okay, let's talk about this property sale here.
So I can't, if I wanted to, if I bought a home for $200,000 and I sell it for $700,000 because I've lived there for the last 10 years or something. Yeah. If I wanted a married couple, my spouse and I, if we sell it and we're going to go rent a place or something, I could sell that $500,000 gain. I could put that in my pocket.
It doesn't matter what you did for your residence after that.
Yeah.
You could move into another property you've owned for the past 15 years. You could, live in a box. You could rent a place. You could move to you could move out of the country. It doesn't matter what you do after that. When you sold your property, how much gain did you have in your property? You had less than $500,000? No tax. As long as you've lived in it for 2 of the last 5 years.
Anything over that, you're going to pay a 15% capital
or whatever your capital gain would be.
Whatever your rate is. That's true. It could be something different.
It could be zero.
It could be, depending on. Boy, what a great strategy this could be. You have some people out there with a lot of gain in their home, and maybe they have a vacation home somewhere. Could they sell that home, their primary residence that they've lived in for more than the last, 2 out of the last 5, take the gain from that home, pocket it, move into their vacation home, and they've had this vacation home for a number of years, live in it for 2 years. Can they then sell that and pocket any gains?
Well, if we could get Superman to fly really fast around the planet and turn back
reverse time
to 2010 or before, the answer would be yes.
Yeah.
But because I don't think we can do that, the answer at this point is not necessarily no. Because what happened in 2010 was Congress realized that they'd left an opening for people to do exactly what you were talking about, especially with rentals, not even just vacation properties. We talked about it on the air.
Rentals for sure, yeah.
We talked about it on the air. If you had 10 rentals and you had a bunch of gain in them, you just moved into one, you kicked the renters out, move into it for 2 years, and you could sell it then for and pocket up to $250,500 married couple gain tax-free, then move into another rental at 2 years. And as long as the sales were at least 2 years apart, and as long as you met the rules of living in it as your primary residence for 2 years, you could exclude up to $500,000 for that married couple on each one of those properties, even though you own all of them for 10, 15, 20 years.
That really is a kind of a rich person's tax break in that example. I mean, nobody with very little money is going to have 10 rental homes. But I think that's why they closed it. But you can't
have to be a rich person, because I know somebody who was not a rich person. He made it the equivalent of $40,000, $50,000.
Oh, no, you don't have to
a year.
be.
But
Oh, yeah.
he built a lot of sweat equity in these rental properties. He had 10 or 12 rentals.
No, you don't have to be. You don't have to be, but it takes some cash. But I mean, what I'm saying is that's probably why they did it. It doesn't matter why they did it. The fact is that they did it.
They did.
But
and now you cannot just, I own a vacation property for the last 10 years. And now I move into it as my primary residence for 2 years. And then I'm going to sell it. Have I lived in it for 2 of the last 5 years? Yes, as my primary residence. Mm-hmm. Have I owned it for at least 2 of the last 5 years? Well, yes, of course. Then I am now eligible for the exclusion. The problem is the exclusion is not, it's still $250,000 for a single person, $500,000. But the problem is not all the gain in that property is going to be attributable to the primary use time. What Congress did was they said, you've owned it for 12 years total. You've only lived in it for 2 years. So we're going to take that percentage, 2/12.
1/6.
1/6, thank you. 1/6, what is it, about 18%?
I did that math in my head.
Is that about 18%?
I don't know.
Okay, come on, do some math. Whatever that
the
percentage is, that percentage
Yeah.
of the gain is going to be treated as primary residence gain. And so that percentage of the gain up to the $250,000, $500,000 mark can be excluded. But the other percentage, the other 5/6 in this example of the gain, cannot be treated as primary residence gain and will show up on your tax
So
return.
on my vacation property, if I had $300,000 a gain, and I did exactly what you said, let's say it's a 20, let's say that it's 20%, easier math. I can exclude, I had a $300,000 gain. I can exclude 20%, call it, of this $300,000, which is $60,000.
Yes.
I will get $60,000 of this $300,000 gain of my vacation home, which I moved into,
Which is now your primary residence.
tax-free, but I will pay capital gains tax at my capital gains rate on the other $240,000
Yes.
using these round numbers.
Now, when they look at the ownership time period and they look at the use issue, they're only going to count the non-primary residence use time after 2008, because that's basically when they put the law in the books. And so if you've owned it since the 60s or 70s, then your ownership period of time is quite nice. But your non-primary residence use time isn't going all the way back to 1960 or 1950, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So, but we're running out of people of that.
They're getting older. They really are.
But basically, they're looking at a proration of the time, the ownership time. How much of the time did you own this property as your primary residence versus how much of the time did you own it as a non-primary residence? And they're going to prorate the gain between those two.
So don't expect if you've got vacation homes and rental homes, there's a chance that you won't get this $250,000 or $500,000 if you're married filing jointly exclusion.
Yeah, and the married filing jointly, now in California and several other states, there's community property, so it's basically owned by both people, regardless of who's on title, for that matter. But in most of the states, separate property states, it may only be in one name. So a married couple, it may be all in his name or her name. And we've had the question, well, do I have to put it in both names to get the exclusion? The answer is no. As a married couple filing a joint return, which is one of the requirements to get the full $500,000, unless you're both on title, only one of you has to be on title, but you both have to satisfy the use time.
Yeah.
You don't even have to be married to get that part of it.
You can just live together.
In fact, I have somebody who's looking to get married here later this year, and both parties, they're they're younger than me, but that's most people nowadays.
So we have to get some perspective on this now.
But they each own their own place, but their each individual place now is not some place that the other wants to live in as a married couple going forward. So their current living arrangements are going to have to be sold or something to to buy a new place. And they're trying to figure out, well, because they've lived in them and owned them since the 90s, early 90s, they've got significant gain. They're single individuals at the moment, but they're going to be married. They only have $250,000 of exclusion on each property. And so they're thinking, how do we, and one of them called me the other day and said, I've heard we can do $500,000 if we're married. Yes. you can do it if you're married. First off, you have to be married and file a joint return. Well, we can wait to sell the property until we get married. And you have to have lived in it. Each one of you has to have lived in it as your primary residence for 2 years before the sale. Okay, that makes it harder.
Cue the trombone. Right?
Yeah, because they don't want to live in either one of the places as a couple. It's fine for each individual to individually, but as a married couple, they don't want to do it. Now, when we're talking about the amount of taxes that they may be able to save, they may say, we're going to gut it out for a little while.
It's found money. I pay the taxes. It's not that much.
Yeah. And at this point, even with if somebody wanted to offer me so much money that I had to pay taxes on the sale of my house because it was more than the $500,000 a gain.
There comes a point where you say,
I might move.
yeah. Make me an offer. I'll certainly consider it. One last scenario here. If I've owned a home for many years, at least, to satisfy 2 out of the last 5, let's say I've owned it for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, something like that. And I decide I'm going to rent it out for a couple of years. So I'm going to go buy another place. I'm going to rent this home out. When do I have to sell this when do I have to sell this now rental? Can I take advantage of this $200,000, $500,000, let's call $500,000 exclusion, even if I've moved out and decided to rent for a little period of time?
There is a curious issue with that non-primary residence and the proration of the gain between the non-primary residence time and the primary residence time. And they only count the non-primary residence time that happened before the primary residence time. So in your case, there is no non-primary residence time.
It's always been primary residence, we're saying.
You could move out of it. You have up to 3 years. Because once you go past 3 years as a non-primary residence, you can't answer, yes, I've lived in it 2 of the last 5.
Yeah.
But at that point, you can, and you don't have to count those 3 years against you or 2 years that it takes to rent it.
So as long as in my example, as long as I sell this rental property within 3 years.
You can practice being a landlord for 2 or 3 years, 2.5 years to see whether you like being one or not.
And then I can sell it and still collect still do the full
500. As long as you haven't then sold any other properties as a primary residence within the 2 year period of time.
Yeah, you have to. You can't do these transactions.
You can only take the
they can't overlap.
You can only take the exclusion once in a 24-month rolling time.
Yeah, there are some rules with this, and it can get sort of complicated. but just for most people's knowledge,
it's every
let's just say
live in it 2 years, sell it for up to $250,000, 500 married couple.
Yeah, and if you've owned your primary residence for a long time and you're thinking about moving somewhere else, you're thinking of downsizing, even if you're not age 55, as they used to say, you can do so and not have to worry about paying taxes on up to $500,000 of gain if you're married.
Of gain. Now, let's be clear what gain. A lot of people confuse equity and gain. Equity is the difference between what the house is worth and what I owe on it. That has nothing to do with your gain. Right.
So let's let's do this one really quickly before we have to call it a day. I bought a home for $250,000 years ago. It's now worth $1 million. Let's just say hypothetically. But over the years, I've borrowed on that. I've borrowed the equity, and I owe
to put the kids through college,
right?
To vacations,
to buy a boat, whatever.
To do things not associated with the house,
right? So my home is worth $1 million, but I now owe $500,000.
And you say, well, my equity is $500,000. I can sell this, and I only have $500,000 of money that's coming out of it. Therefore, it should all be tax free, right? No. What you owe, if that were the case, nobody would ever pay their house off. And before I sold my house, I'd borrow out as much as I could borrow out because then I wouldn't have as much equity. I owe a lot.
Yes.
The loan has nothing to do with your basis. Your basis is what did you pay for it? Not what did you put down, not your down payment. What did you pay for it? You paid $300,000 for the house. Okay, I put down $10,000 and I borrowed $290,000.
Doesn't matter.
That's immaterial. Whether you put down 10%, 50%, 100%, you paid $300 for it.
Yep.
Now, what have you done since you've owned it? Have you put in a pool? You added a new roof. Have you improved it?
You can add to that basis.
You can add to the basis as if it's your primary residence. If it's a rental in the day, there's depreciation, and that gets into a whole other game. But basically, what did you pay for it? What have you paid to improve it over the years? That adds to your basis. And that's where you're going to look at the starting point for determining tax or not paying tax, or how much gain you have.
Yeah, we bring that up because there's some confusion among
for a long time. People have been living off their home ATMs. Basically, they've been borrowing money out of it and then buying a rental property. They borrowed money out of it to put the kids through school. They borrowed money out of it because interest rates have come down so far. They could refinance, take $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 out of it, and even without resetting the time frame, have the same payment that they had before.
Isn't that remarkable? I just did that like 2 years ago. 2.75% interest rate.
Yeah, mine's only at 3%.
My daughter was like upset because she said, they're offering me like 3.5% interest rate. That is far too high. So she bought it down to like 3%. And I said, you have no idea. The home I bought now that I've lived in for 20 some odd years, I said my first rate was 8.5%.
Well, when I bought the house before this house, I got a 7% fixed. This was mid-90s. I got a 7% fixed rate on the house.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, man, that is gold. I'm never going to refinance this. I'll have this until the day that, for 30 years, I'm not going to pay extra money on this. It'll be done.
Yeah.
Oh, that lasted a couple of years. And then it was like, oh, we got to refinance this. Interest rates have come down.
It's your perspective. In 1990, 10% is what I had a 10% loan.
I remember mid-80s when my friends were starting to buy houses. It was real easy to calculate a payment because $100,000 was $1,000 a month because it was like 11 or 12% interest.
Oh, it was, and we didn't really think anything of it.
That was what it was.
That's what it was. That's what it cost. Now, of course, I could park my money in Treasury and get 12%, 12% or whatever it was. So
about what you were paying in interest
wasn't that big a deal. But anyway, yeah, wow, it's all about perspective, and I can almost assure you that I'm not going to ever refinance this 2.75. I don't know why. I said that at 6.5%. I'm never going to refinance this. I said it at 4.5%.
It's becoming more of a real statement. Now, I do believe I'll refinance mine. And this becomes a matter of, I don't think, I want to be, I've always wanted to be paid off when I hit retirement. But I think I'm not going to want to be paid off when I hit retirement. But I want to have a very small loan. And
we've talked about that strategy.
So when I get, within a year or two of retirement, or when I think interest rates may go up, I'm paying it down fairly quickly. I'm going to be done in in 6 years.
Yeah.
I'll take out a $50,000 first mortgage on it, whatever, and then impound it. And then just have an automatic payment that I don't have to think about. My taxes are paid. My insurance is paid. A little adjustment once a year.
It's like having a free and clear home.
And the payment's going to be $400 or $500 a month. I mean,
not
with my property taxes.
No, not with your tax. Your taxes are going to be higher than your payment.
Oh, significantly,
considerably. Yeah. So if you have any questions on this kind of stuff, I don't know how many of you folks are thinking about moving or taking some equity out of your home, selling your home, and doing that kind of thing. Just know that there is this exclusion, Section 121 of the tax code, which sounds really odd. But it's not. We've had this for almost 20. It will be 25 years.
Well, we've had Section 121.
Well, yes, okay, but
they rewrote it
in its current
1997, 25 years ago.
In its current form, it'll be 25 years this May 7th is when it started of 97, and I mean, it's not a lot of people still know about it. So I find that really interesting when I talk to folks, because we've been talking about it since 1997. So it seems like it should have been in the forefront of everybody's minds, but it's not. It's not.
We need to be on more stations to get in more people's minds.
You want some help with this or anything else, you can talk to Professor Plum or anyone at Lucia Capital Group. I want to remind you that because they got a bunch of advisors that can help you out that all kind of go through Professor Rick Plum. 800-644-1150. 800-644-1150. Talk to them at Lucia Capital Group, not just about things like home equity, but all the other aspects of your retirement planning. Is it worth it to move? Other things that you need to consider besides just pocketing some extra gain.
Well, I know that a couple of years back, I was talking to somebody who made pretty good money, lived in California, that had lived in California for a long time, and their property tax was X, but they didn't think about that. and they were wanting to move out of California because their income taxes stunk. They hated it. So they wanted to move to one of the tax-free income states. And I said, well, yeah, your income is going to go from X to about half of X.
Yeah.
And you'll be able to buy a nice big place, bigger place. But that savings from what you would have been paying in retirement and income taxes to the state and the property taxes you're going to be paying on that new property in that new state, you're not going to save anything.
They got to get their money from somewhere.
Right. And so it's a matter of perspective, because they were under the old the system in California, which keeps long-term residents' property taxes down fairly low. Their property taxes were going to jump dramatically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like they had in California back prior to Prop 13 in the 70s.
But it was going to go from maybe a couple $1,000s a year because of the way they were to $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 a year.
Offsetting any,
which is about what they would have been paying or less, which is more than they would have been paying in state income tax once they retired.
Well, this is what an advisor can help you out with. Things to think about, things to consider. Again, 800-644-1150, or go online, luciacap.com.
They still moved. They wanted out of California.
See, I've heard that before. I just wonder, if you're used to wearing shorts in December and January, and all of a sudden you got to shovel snow in November and again shovel slush in late February. My thought would be go rent for a year before you actually do it. Decide if you like it, because if the way real estate prices is going, if you're moving out of a state like California, you're not coming back.
Right.
Because you can't afford it.
Well, I think that if you're moving anywhere to a new area, you should rent for a little while anyway.
I absolutely 100% agree with that.
Unless you have spent time there and you have family or whatever, and you know the areas, you know the neighborhoods, you know what's going on. Rent to see if you even like that. It may be you love the area, but not that neighborhood.
It could be anything. So
find where you want to live before you put down the money, because it's hard to turn it around that quick.
That's why you talk to an advisor. Things like that. It's not just about, it's not always just about buckets and planning and strategies. It can be things as little as that.
As big as that.
As big, which turn out to be quite big. LuciaCap.com. You want to learn more about us, go to Spotify, our podcast at Spotify. Subscribe, and you'll get the programs downloaded automatically.
Now, I'm only bringing this up because we're done and we can't talk about it today. You teased something last.
Yeah, I did, didn't I? Yes, I talked about how did you? Okay, next show. Boy, I hope I remember this. Next show, we're going to talk about how you came to be an advisor. How it'll be more of the get to know you.
What dragged me kicking and screaming into financial planning?
And what kind of jobs did you have before that? That might be kind of fun to talk about. What have we done? What jobs did we have before we're doing what we do now?
About the only thing I didn't do was work in a restaurant.
I did work in a restaurant.
I did a lot of other things, but I never actually worked.
I was a dishwasher. Well, we'll get into that some other time. Boy, when I think about the things that I did. But hey, teaches you a work ethic, right? Out of time. Thanks again so much for listening to us. This is Managing Your Financial Future. We will talk about what we said we're going to talk about next time, I hope, if I remember. And until that next time, I'm Johnny Dean for Professor Rick Plum, Certified Financial Planner Professional. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.
The information provided should not be considered specific tax, legal, or investment advice and is not specific to any individual's personal circumstances. To the extent that this material concerns tax matters, it is not intended or written to be used and cannot be used by a taxpayer for the purpose of avoiding penalties that may be imposed by law. Each taxpayer should seek independent advice from a tax professional based on his or her individual circumstances. Different types of investments and or investment strategies involve varying levels of risk, and there can be no assurance that any specific investment or investment strategy will be profitable for a client's or prospective client's portfolio. Thus, investments may result in a loss of principal. Accordingly, no client or prospective client should assume that the information presented serves as a receipt of or a substitute for personalized advice from LCG or from any other investment professional. You should always seek counsel of the appropriate advisor prior to making any investment decision. All investments are subject to risk, including the loss of principal. This material was gathered from sources believed to be reliable. However, its accuracy cannot be guaranteed. Annuities are long-term investment products designed for retirement purposes. Guarantees are based on the claims-paying ability of the issuer, subject to their terms and conditions. Early withdrawals may be subject to surrender penalties and, if taken prior to age 59 and a half, may be subject to an additional 10% federal tax. Annuities are not FDIC insured. Certain terms and conditions apply, so please read insurance company materials carefully. Insurance services offered through LPL Financial or its licensed affiliates. California Insurance License Number 0518721. Examples cited are hypothetical, are for illustrative purposes only, are not guaranteed, and subject to potential federal and state law amendments. There is no guarantee that you will achieve the results discussed or illustrated. Treasury securities are backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, but are subject to inflation risk. Rick Plum is a registered representative with, and securities and advisory services offered through LPL LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, and member FINRA SIPC. The investment professionals are affiliated with LPL Financial and are conducting business using the name Lucia Capital Group, a separate entity from LPL Financial.